Good morning to you. It's Wednesday morning and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn and to our Bible talk for today. Lovely to see you and I hope you are well and cheerful and looking forward to a good day today. Just to remind you friends, we are approaching Holy Week and we'd absolutely love it if you could join us for our services over the next few days, both in Penn and in Tamworth. You'd be very, very welcome. Do look at the websites and the Facebook pages and so on, but do join us and let's journey together with Jesus on his passion, his death and his resurrection. So let's really share with that. Let's discover anew just what it's all about for us this year. But do join us. We'd absolutely love to see you. We are in our Bible talks though. We're in Matthew's Gospel and we're also pretty much in Holy Week as well. So that's kind of where we're at too with this. We're in chapter 26 this morning. Just to kind of remind you of the context. Jesus has entered Jerusalem. He's had lots of discussions, you might say. Discussions in inverted commas with the scribes and Pharisees and so on. They fire a load of questions at him, he answers them. And then in chapter 23, he kind of gives them a few home truths. And in chapter 24, he talks a bit about the destruction of the temple. Chapter 25, we've had 3 parables. And now we're in chapter 26 this morning. So without further ado, here we go. Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 to 13. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." Now when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very costly ointment, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. But when the disciples saw it, they were angry and said, "Why this waste? For this ointment could have been sold for a large sum and the money given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? She's performed a good service for me. For you will always have the poor with you, but you'll not always have me. By pouring this ointment on my body, she's prepared me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she's done will be told in remembrance of her." Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, let's think this morning about the troublesome, or whatever you want to call it, figure of Judas Iscariot. I want to think about this morning. Because, let's first ask ourselves the question, why Judas did what he did. Now, what we're about to go into is ultimately speculation, because ultimately we do not know, and it may be something we haven't thought of. But there've been kind of various suggestions over the years as to why Judas betrayed Jesus. The first theory, which kind of comes from John's Gospel, is that the devil entered him, that he was kind of inspired by Satan. And John's Gospel does say that Satan entered the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. So that's one level. That's one theory. Secondly, the second theory is that he did it for the money, that he was kind of short of money. It does say that he'd been the treasurer. Not that he cared for the money, but that he'd taken money out as they'd gone along. I think that's mentioned in John's Gospel. So that's another theory, that Judas did it for the cash. And of course, here you've got this woman pouring this ointment on Jesus, which was worth about 4 months' wages onto Jesus' hair and feet. And Judas says, "What a go!" And I think it's John's Gospel says it was Judas of the disciples that said, "Why was this money being wasted? Couldn't it have been spent on something else?" And so that might have wound Judas up. So the first theory is that he was inspired by Satan. That's one theory. He was inspired by the devil. The second theory is that he did it for the cash. It's a possibility. The third theory, which is kind of the one that's doing rounds most at the moment, is that Judas Iscariot came from a family of people who were basically terrorists. The Jews had got these Romans who kind of taken over the country. And what do you do about them? And there were various theories. And the Zealots were some of the people that thought they should be revolutionary, that they could rise up with this great big popular revolutionary movement and kick out the horrible Romans and so on. And the third theory is that Judas Iscariot came from a kind of family of revolutionaries. and they've been disappointed that Jesus had not risen up so far. And here we have Jesus at this meal talking about his burial, but just that wasn't what Judas wanted. That Judas wanted him to rise up and kick the Romans out, and talk of his burial wasn't kind of what Judas wanted to hear. So the theory with this one is that Judas wanted to boot out the horrible Romans. So what Judas did was betray Jesus to try and force Jesus' hand, to try and wind up the crowd to boot out the Romans. So there's various theories to say. There's one that Satan entered him. Well, that does take some of the sense of betrayal out of it. If it was Satan's idea, not Judas's, that's one. The second theory is he did it for the money, and the third theory is he was some kind of revolutionary who wanted to boot out the Romans, and Jesus kind of wasn't doing it the way he wanted him to, so he kind of helped give him a bit of a push. Ultimately, however, we do not know. It could have been any of those theories. It might have been something completely different. It's good to speculate. It does kind of get you under the teeth of what's going on. But ultimately, we don't know why he did it, but we know he did. Which brings us kind of to the second question, which kind of says, what did Judas do? And in a sense, so what? What did Judas ultimately do? He ultimately gave away Jesus' position, if you think about it. In practice, that's what Judas actually did. The authorities were looking for him. Judas gave his position away by giving Jesus a kiss in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the man. That's ultimately all that Judas did. I say all. The reason I say all is because this is a bit odd, because Jesus didn't exactly keep a low profile. I'm sure they'd have found him at some point anyway. So I can't quite see, on one level, it's difficult to see why the Bible makes such a fuss about what Judas actually did, because, as I say, I'm sure they'd have found him at some point, if not now, then a few months' time or next year or something. I'm quite sure they'd have found him anyway. So on one level, you have to ask the question, why is it so important? Which brings us to the question, why is it important? And, of course, there are lots of theories for this, but, again, I want to give you just two in particular this morning. Firstly, I think it's all about the passion of Jesus. What did Jesus go through? We all know about Jesus' pain. We know about Jesus' agony and his hanging on the cross and so on. But there was more to it than that. I think it's very important, and noteworthy I should say, that Jesus was betrayed by one of his friends. I think that's the first thing to bring out of this, is that Jesus was betrayed by one of his friends. That he understands what betrayal feels like. That part of the passion, that the pain, the agony that Jesus endured wasn't just the physical pain and the shame, but it was also the sense of betrayal, that he was betrayed by one of his friends. They took sweet fellowship, I think as the psalmist said, they took sweet fellowship together, and that person lifted up his heel against me. The sense of betrayal, that Judas had been one of Jesus' closest friends. And I think that's very important to recognise that he was betrayed by one of his friends. So I think that's one of the reasons why what Judas did was important, is that part of the passion of Jesus is that he was betrayed by one of his friends. I think the other thing which happens, why what Judas did is important, is all to do with the way Jesus is. Jesus, throughout his life, is always a very active person. He does lots of things. He teaches, he heals, he walks, he talks, he walks on water, he passes like he casts out demons. Jesus is always a very active person. He does lots of things. But something which is a bit subtle, but you might not have spotted it. But when Garden of Gethsemane, when Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss, things start going the other way. From that moment on, instead of being active, things start happening to Jesus. Jesus becomes more passive. He gets led away. He was brought. He was whipped. So he goes from being a person who does things to having things done to him. He goes from being active to being passive. The word passion and the word passive come from the same root, okay? And part of the suffering of Jesus is he goes from being somebody who is in control of events, in a sense, to almost things being done to him. Now, that's really important, because there is a point of our lives when many of us find it's much more comfortable being active. But many of us reach a point where it might be because we're ill, it may be because we are poor, or it may be because things start happening to us when we can feel out of control of events. We can feel passive. We feel as though we're not in control of our lives, but events seem to take control of us. And the point of this is that Jesus has been there. In his passion, he also had things done to him. So I hope that makes sense. Two really important things about the passion of Jesus, which come out through the actions of Judas. Firstly, the fact he was betrayed by one of his friends. That's a really important thing. As I say, it wasn't just the pain, the agony, and the shame what happened to Jesus. It was also the fact he was betrayed by one of his friends. But also that Jesus endured what many people endure, but only more so, a sense of not being active, but actually being passive instead. That he experienced that absolutely firsthand in his life, as part of the passion of Jesus. So, we've had some speculation this morning about why Judas did what he did. Why is it so important when all he did really was give Jesus' position away? Firstly, because it showed that Jesus was betrayed by one of his friends. And secondly, because he experienced passion, he experienced passivity. He experienced the indignity of things being done to him instead. And he's been through all the pains that we go through.